I will wake up the next morning. If I've had a really good session the night before, and I'm talking about a gaming session, let's be clear. Okay, we've had a really good session of a game the night before.
Family show, Steve, family show.
Family show. But that's going to get cut. Hi, this is Steve, aka @AllOnThar on Twitter, and here are some more of my gaming vexes. In this episode, we've swung back towards the original thinking behind the podcast. Although we've had great fun looking back over the games we've played in or run for others, I've often found that the discussions that have stayed with me longest are those where we mull over a gaming vex, an element of tabletop RPG life that, for me at least, is a thorny issue and one that doesn't necessarily have a simple answer. Amongst the many things that fit into this category, one of the most enduring is what I've chosen to call crunch time. Those moments in a gaming session where you're called on to make a snap decision to keep the game moving, often in response to inspired thinking from your players, and where despite all your planning and scheming beforehand, you find yourself a little bit blindsided. I wondered how others handled this, hence the discussion featured in this episode. I did have the thought that this was maybe something that was mainly a me problem, so before this episode went out, I put up a Twitter poll asking whether people considered themselves to be a fretful GM, someone who tends to overanalyse their GMing either before, during or after a session. Of 58 respondents, 81% said yes, so this seems to be a vex that goes beyond just myself. I hope you enjoy the discussion. Thanks go to Martin @mcookie123, Doc @Dracoe, Neil @OldEscosRPing, and Andrew @Zos93 for their really helpful insights. Thanks all. Before launching into the episode, we've had another review on iTunes. I'm amazed that people manage to work out how to do it nowadays, but there you are. This one comes from Matt Broom, or @AsakoSo on Twitter. Matt says, "This is an excellent RPG podcast. Steve as host has a really light touch, masterfully bringing out the expertise and opinions of his guests, who have played the games they're discussing with him. In-depth discussion of systems and themes, for example, gaming in Middle-earth, and reflection on how their hobby has developed and new games. Always worthwhile and highly recommended." Thanks, Matt. At the time of recording, we're fast approaching the date of Matt's Owlbear and the Wizard Staff one-day convention, held in Leamington Spa. This will be the second in-person event that I've attended since the pandemic began, the first being UK Games Expo. Matt always puts on a great event, and I'm looking forward to meeting up with fellow gamers in an appropriately socially distanced way to take part in some in-person gaming. I'm going to be playing Zweihander and running a session of the D-Sanction, so I'm really looking forward to that. Anyway, enough of the preamble. It's crunch time. So the first question is, who categorises themselves as a fretful GM? I'm going to put my hand up.
Me, definitely. GM. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
No.
And Doc's got his hand up as well.
I do. Come on, Neil. Do you not sometimes think, what if I don't kill any of them? What if they all survive?
Well, if they do, it's whatever the dice decide, isn't it?
That old chestnut. So for the record then, we've got Doc, Martin and myself categorising ourselves as fretful GMs. Neil, definitely not. So I think what we're going to... There's going to be a broad continuum, isn't there? But I think we've got people like Neil and Sam on one side. Mm-hmm. Absolutely respect that people can be like that. And then you've got normal people who stress out about this sort of stuff. So this question really was one that came out of, it was out of our Warhammer game, Neil, at the Expo.
It's great. It was.
But there was one particular scene in the starter set, and for those people listening, spoilers, there's one bit where your character are escorting somebody to be executed, and when they get to that execution point, then something, exciting happens. And I remember reading this and thinking, that's the most amazing thing. And as we were playing, the characters were skins, which meant they probably wouldn't have to get... And I just thought to myself, they're going to miss out on something really cool here, and I'm going to miss out on something really cool, okay? Because I think I just want to see how it all works. And so I, being a fretful GM, and sort of, thinking these things over like I do, which I don't know if other people do after you've finished running the game, I thought to myself, that didn't feel right to me, because it felt as though I was taking a bit of agency away. And also I felt that there's a little bit of railroading going on. So, and that for me is what I call crunch time. So there's crunch time in a session when you're making decisions on the fly as a GM, and you have to make things up, or there's a branch point in a scenario or a session where you have to decide something, and how do you make the right decision? And if you make the wrong decision, what do you do about it? And there's the other thing, which I know Martin's going to touch on, which is when you've got a grand campaign going on and you're trying to get to that end point, how do you manage crunch time there? Because it is such an amorphous thing. You could divide it up into how we manage it. So in terms of before the game, so it could be session 0, or when you're just sort of working out how you're going to play together nicely as a group. There's what happens in the session, and there's also what to do if and when you become aware of it after the session as well. So how do you manage that? And Neil's going to say, don't be such a bloody idiot. Move on.
What I'm going to say. So I, of course, I know exactly the bit of the game you're talking about. Now that you've told me about, like, I played in it, and you're telling me, like, your analysis of it from a GM point of view. From my perspective as a player, it was bloody brilliant.
Okay, that's the end of the podcast.
So that's what matters, right? I mean, because that's your job done, isn't it? I mean, it's important you enjoy it as well. Of course it is. But, like, as long as you can see the players engaged and enjoying it, doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Like, it's a game,
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. Done. Right. Go on. Go and have a beer.
It is a game. And I think as GMs and players, we invest a lot of ourselves in this. And I think it's fair to say possibly GMs invest a little bit more, maybe because of prep and, all that sort of stuff. But I mean,
good GMs do, yeah.
And I think because we invest quite a lot of ourselves, then I think that wanting to do the best you can and make it as good an experience as possible leads some people amongst us. I mean, I don't want to go too deep, but I think it's probably more than just gaming. It's probably life in general. Throwing it out to you guys, really. I mean, have you had experiences like that where you've hit that crunch time and, either has or hasn't worked?
Can I tell my favourite story about
Please do.
This is when I came back to GMing. I'd not GM'd for about, 15 years, I think. I GM'd all the time at school. Then I got into a long-running campaign where, somebody else did all the GMing. And I was going to be the first GM apart from this guy in the group, and it was really big. I was running the Witchfire trilogy. I don't know whether any of you know that. Privateer Press, you probably don't. It is an awesome campaign. It is packed with amazing art, an amazing story, all these things. Now, you're probably thinking, an amazing story? I wonder whether that can cause problems with players with free will. And, we were going through, it was going really well. I was showing them the pictures. I'd done so much prep. And anyway, you get to this bit where they discover that this witch is raising an undead army. And the way that you discover this is you look over the brow of the hill and you just see hundreds of skeletons. They're not offensive, but they're like digging and they're building carts and they're doing these sort of things. And you walk among them and it's all spooky and dangerous, and you go up and you find out what she's up to. Or, if you're my players, you look over the brow of the hill and go, bloody hell, that's not skeletons. Well, we can't go anywhere near them. We're off. And I dealt with, and I think this is useful to offer GM tips at this point, I dealt with this by looking at them and then just going off and sitting. Just going to the next room and just sitting, going...
A massive sulk.
Well, it wasn't even a sulk. It was just my head was, what am I going to do? I've let them down. And this is one of these long weekends. So we would play Thursday till Sunday. And I was going, they're not even going to find out. Anyway, so that's how I dealt with the crunch. Just leave.
By not dealing with it.
Just leave.
I used to GM a campaign called The World's Largest Dungeon for D&D 3.5, and that actually had a thing in the front which said, if at any point your players have a problem with this, turn around and say, look, I paid $100 for this, we're damn well playing it.
So you can talk about the amount of money you've spent on it and this player contract. They've agreed to play. What about you, Martin? What are your thoughts on this?
When crunch time happens to me, I think it's when I am handling the sort of climax of a scenario or a kind of short series or whatever, the denouement, I could probably count on the fingers of one hand the times I think it's gone really well, where I've kind of thought that or A slotted into B, slotted into C, and it really went how I'd envisioned it. So I think that one of the problems I think is when you're handling like a big scene like that, and I'm sure I might be the only one that thinks like this, but there's loads of moving parts. To a big climactic scene, you've got a lot of things going on. You've probably got multiple combatants. You've probably got the big bad in the room. He or she's going to have fistfuls of spells and special abilities to keep a track on. You've probably got a bit of exposition. So the big bad will have explained why the Earth is doomed in 30 minutes. So you've got to make sure that gets across as well, the jeopardy. And you've probably, in a climactic scene, you've probably got a clock. You're probably running up against some sort of time. And I think as a GM, that is like juggling jelly. That is a really tricky sort of thing to pull off. So I think maybe you can be too hard on yourself. I would never, like in my working life, I would not allow myself to be in a position when there's that many variables that I'm trying to deal with at once. And yet in my, fun games mastering life, I'm like, 10 things going on, 10 different spells for each of these guys. Fine, I'll handle it. So I think it's hardly a surprise that it doesn't always.
And I think it does have an impact. I mean, on me anyway. If I've had a really good gaming session like before, I am buzzing the next day. And it's ridiculous, but it is because you've had great time with your friends. It's all worked really well, and there's that sort of that special something that's come through. But when you have a session which falls flat from a player perspective, it may be completely irrelevant. But as a GM, if it does fall flat, it puts a downer on the next day. And again, it's a game, it's fun, but I think it's just part of how my brain deals with stuff like this.
Well, I was just going to go back to consider, I don't know whether any of you heard Roleplay Rescue with Shay. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And he did an amazing episode when he was talking about his basic beliefs about GMing. And one of the basic beliefs about GMing that he had that was in his head was it is a GM's responsibility to provide everyone a good time. It is the GM's job to, ensure that, everything is set up to prepare, to know what's going on, to understand all the rules, to, be on top of it all the time, and to ensure that everybody has a good time. That's the GM's job. And I think when you are saying in the morning, I'm buzzing or flat, that I think just shows how much we do invest in an expectation that if the game goes well, you think, I would never, if a game went badly, think, well, that wasn't my fault.
Well, exactly, yeah.
But I do think we should always just go back a bit and say, you know what, players have to find the fun sometime. And talking about GMs where the players really have to find the fun, Neil did want to say something.
It was going back to Martin's when Martin was talking about the climactic piece and that crunch, and again you talk about all the factors and balancing everything and so on, and you worry that it doesn't make sense or whatever. I mean, if you've ever felt like that when I've been playing one of your games, I've never ever felt that. You always seem very composed and like everything's well thought out.
One of the most organised GMs that I've come across, I think it's fair to say, with Martin.
Yeah,
it's really.
It's that GM's perception of how the players are enjoying it. I have had sessions where I've thought, oh, that was a bit rubbish, and I know I've had better sessions and the players, oh, that was great, really enjoyed that. And sometimes you think, they're just being polite. I guess nobody's going to say, oh, that was rubbish, that was boring. But, they don't have to say that was great, And I think it's about, our expectation. Like, why do we do it? And what are our expectations? We do it because, well, I think we enjoy entertaining people. We enjoy the whole creative endeavor of it. But I think there's a bit more. I do think we like being that bit of kind of center of attention, because you are when you're the GM. You're kind of setting yourself aside from everyone else because you've got that special role. So and so I think if you go into that, I think you can end up with a lot of unrealistic expectations around that. And like everybody else I GM with, I think is a brilliant GM. I just think that's great. How's Steve do it? How's Martin do it? How's Chris do it? I think that about all the people I GM with.
I'm right here, Neil. I'm right here, Neil.
I've never played in one of your games, Doc.
Okay.
Sorry. How does Doc do it? I would imagine myself saying if I played in one of your games.
I think if you go into it though, as you say, being the centre of attention, that does in some ways increase the performance anxiety though, because you're thinking, I am the centre of attention, therefore everybody is looking to me to have a good time.
So why do it then? If you're anxious, why do it? I think the other thing then to me is
I do it because I bloody love it. That's why.
Exactly.
I mean, the anxiety is just something you have to live with.
So is it genuine anxiety, or is it just being a bit worried about things? I mean, that's because I think there's a difference.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I wouldn't like to say it was anxiety because I know a number of people who genuinely have anxiety that prevents them accessing role playing. Full stop. Or,
exactly. Yeah.
So I wouldn't call it like I would really hesitate to say it's
that's a fact.
I call performance anxiety as in kind of
just I think it's but it does. I like things, and maybe this is my control freakery, but I like things to go well. And I suppose what I sometimes have a hard time in doing is remembering. If I think back to my playing when I'm playing, it's very rarely I walk away from like a big scene like that we've just played through and go, you know what, that was a bit lame, because I think really this because you're invested in it as well. And I think especially if it's a campaign rather than maybe a one shot, or even a series rather than one shot. And also I would say that I think players it's like sort of Rashomon. I think if you ask 5 players who've just been through a scene and say, what did you really like about that scene? You'll get 5 different answers. And I think as a GM, you kind of weirdly, you'll think they'll all have the same answer. And of course you will, because you've had 5 different experiences. And so sometimes you just have to kind of slap yourself around the face and say, look, they're Rashomoning out there, and they're going to all remember it slightly differently, and they're going to all have had a slightly different flavour of, hopefully, fun and fulfilment.
I mean, I ran Star Frontiers at Grogmeet one year, and I thought it went terribly. It was a really antiquated system, really antiquated module. But talking to all the players, they all thought it was hilarious. They thought it was brilliant fun.
One of my mates was in that game, and he said it was really good. So,
because I do suffer from performance anxiety when I GM, which is one of the reasons I rarely do it. As you're saying, basically I don't offer to do it because it does kind of. But I think one thing, for me, I do struggle a bit to kind of know when people are having a good time. It's kind of.
But I think what players remember is what awesome thing they did, not necessarily what awesome thing was in the game. And I mean, you're talking about Rashomon, and that's exactly right. The things that people walk away thinking was amazing, the thing that you look on social media, the following day that all the players are talking about, is not. I mean, it doesn't have zero correlation with what you thought was going to be cool the day before, but I mean, it's often something completely different. They get obsessed about. I don't know. I think we could all list some weird things that our players have got obsessed with that we didn't put any effort into at all, and it just sort of appeared entirely spontaneously. And I think the risk of over preparation, and I think I'm not saying I learnt it that day, on that grassy knoll with the skeletons below, because I didn't. Obviously, I should have done. But I think what you take from that is, you have it loose enough that the players are able to create their own awesome things. And we would all utterly agree as players that what you love is coming up with a brilliant idea and doing something awesome, not the GM describing something awesome to you. Give them the space, give them the opportunity to be awesome, and that's a real win.
I think it's different, isn't it? So if you've got quite, let's say, a very loose story game. So if we say something like like Spire, okay, it doesn't mean you can't just very sort of carefully describe what happens in Spire, but the system is quite loose. And then you have something like OSE, which is loose because it doesn't, it's rulings, not rules. But if you're running a dungeon, let's say, where things happen in a specific order or an adventure like that, is there a difference between where you're trying to juggle things, create things on the fly in a narrative story type setup, or where you're delivering a pre-prepared experience like a dungeon? And that's not Neil. This is I'm not underselling dungeons. Okay, not that you only do dungeons.
So one of my things is, like, if you are worried about that, crunch points, is run simpler adventures. Dungeons aren't always simpler, but they are like constrained environments, and so it's more predictable from a GM's point of view. I mean, that's why I think dungeons are always great starting adventures for beginning GMs. Yeah, there's just enough scope for a bit of role playing, try out the system, and it's kind of quite predictable. But then going back to your point there, Steve, about following an adventure that is more kind of a pre-planned adventure versus something that's more open. So I'm running 2 games at the moment: Night's Dark Terror, which we're drawing towards the end of. I've got 2 groups playing now, and Evils of Ilmai, which is effectively a hex crawl, and they're both very, very different experiences. And I don't know if Night's Dark Terror, it probably has felt a bit railroady at times, but I'm not asked. It's like it's like there's an adventure to
That's
follow.
That's why we love
here.
you, Neil, because you're not asked.
Well, there are some things I'm asked about, to be fair, but that isn't something that like I'd lose sleep over. But I do find there's something differently creative, almost liberating about that, like running a hex crawl. Fair amount of detail, but huge swathes of, like, there's nothing's supposed about this will happen or that will happen or whatever. It's just like, this is the way it is, and you just let the players loose. And we've all had different, all kinds of stuff going on. And when I read or hear about other GMs running that, and their players have all done things completely differently, and because you don't have that presupposed, like, this is going to happen and that's going to happen, it's just incredibly liberating, I think.
It kind of comes down to player buy-in as well. The players need to kind of know what sort of thing, as you say, for new players, a dungeon crawl can be great because they're not entirely sure what they're supposed to do or how creative they can be, and again, for sandboxes, some people get intimidated. If you can do, it's analysis paralysis. Or I can do 100 different things. I'll spend so long trying to decide what to do that I'll effectively end up doing nothing.
So thinking about going into the game, there's expectations around, the type of game you can do. Is it a very much open world, or is it quite tightly constrained? And I think, from my perspective, a hex crawl isn't. Although it's open, so you can do a lot of things, it's actually quite highly specified in terms of what you can do. So, for example, Forbidden Lands obviously is a modern game, but it's you follow procedures, and the bad things happen to players because you follow the procedures, and that's what you sign up for. So there's that element. But I think even within something like even a relatively simple dungeon, a GM in game could sometimes make a decision causes a problem down the line. So it could be that you in the heat of the moment you make as a GM you make a decision which leads to people to roll up a lot more characters, or you might do something which actually you think inadvertently, because some of these things are quite complex, you ruin things later on or change things later on. So there's that element of preparation ahead of time, which you can do. And I think we'll probably touch on that a bit more, but it's really, how do you manage that crunch time? Because you make the decision, then you think, oh, bugger, I've broken the adventure. What do I do now? Yeah. And then you can go off and sulk. Okay, or rather think about it. Because what I've never done it. Okay, and this is probably just me, because I'm coming back to GMing for a long time out, and then GMing for just about 3 years now. Since I've come back, I've never said, hang on, I need to think about this.
After my sulk, I did, and I didn't do this well. I didn't do it in a dignified manner. There were probably tears. But I basically, I can imagine a dignified way of going to the players and saying, look, I clearly didn't describe this in the way that I meant to describe it. What is in your head is not what was in my head. What you saw was 100 hostile skeletons. What I saw was a fascinating Baroque environment where all the peasants were replaced by skeletons. And isn't that amazing? So just to say, these are not hostile skeletons. You know, there's so many better ways to do it. But basically what I ended up saying was, this is the next part of the adventure.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, so I think sometimes it's okay to be a little bit meta. I mean, sometimes I'm really very. Sometimes, I mean, I don't know. I think I've played in games with quite a lot of it. Sometimes we're quite meta, and we'll say tonight we're playing this, and someone will go, "What about doing such and such?" You say that ain't the adventure for tonight, and we're quite happy with that because, as you've said, you've got player buy-in. I have created a character to participate in this game. We can. Let's not get onto con games where people start trying to do weird things, but you know, I think so. My suggestion for a crunch game, and there are many others, is to go a little bit meta and say to them, if I've messed up, say, I think one option is to say, I have messed up. Can we go back a little bit and go over it?
So we're saying experience our vulnerability as GMs. So, for example, if I'm thinking about that Warhammer scenario, thinking things through, you know, lots going on, absolutely basically exhausted after the week I'd had and the day before. I think what I should have done was gone, let's just have a cup of tea and think about this.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
The emphasis can't be on the GM to provide all the fun. You know, you've got to have, it is a social contract, and a player may not be feeling it that day. So they've got to realise that maybe a GM isn't feeling it that day. You know, they don't know what's going on in someone's life outside the game. You know, people make mistakes. People do all sorts of.
It depends, though, doesn't it, on whether players realise.
Exactly.
I mean, if they don't care as long as they're having a good game. A good example of this, you know, is that like you might have a boss of some kind, and in your mind you're thinking this boss is like badass, and it'd be a really exciting fight. It's one of the things I know you mentioned in your notes for this, Steve, and but the players, for whatever reason, maybe some lucky rolls, they're very clever. There's some abilities that you've kind of forgotten about, whatever it might be. They bypass that, or they beat it. They beat it, and that boss is supposed to be like the main threat throughout, and and it's going to foreshadow the end times and all this kind of stuff. And they come up and they're like, ping, 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 and the boss is gone, and you're like, oh shit, okay. So you can kind of go, oh well, I got that wrong, but you don't want to take away their sense of achievement of having done something clever. And I think you're right. The thing is, you either say, well, let's just take a break now, or without telling them, you don't need to say, oh, you've screwed up my plans. You just say, that would be a good time to have a break. Yeah, exactly. You pesky kids. Or and you think, oh, okay, well, that was like Sauron they've beat, and Morgoth's still alive, so it's actually Morgoth you got to deal with.
There's a bigger bad.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that panic thing, isn't it? I have had it plenty of times, but I think I've learned over time to be a bit relaxed about it. And actually, the game I'm running, the Evils of Ilmaer, there's a system I picked for it, like an OSR system, which actually I thought would be really good, but it's absolutely fucking awful. And basically,
you've got to name it now. You've got to name the system.
I will let me. I will do more than name it. I will. It's on my shelf of shame. Here you go. Saga of the Splinter.
Oh, that's.
I mean, the cover itself should have. It's not that bad, but it's. What it does is, unlike a lot of other OSR games, but level 3 you're still quite like vulnerable and whatever. Not in this. Oh no, freaking badasses in this, and so it makes an adventure that is really designed for something like OSE or Swords and Wizardry a bit of a walk in the park. And so a lot of the scenes, they've just kind of and we've had a lot of fun with it. It's not like it's been a bad experience. We have huge fun and the great players, but from how I think that module should have been experienced, it hasn't felt quite like that. Although they are coming, they are almost right at the end now, and I think perhaps it is going to be quite tough for them. But what it taught me was just don't sweat it, So actually that experience of if they do come in and they batter that thing, great. Just let them get on with it,
Absolutely. I had that last night we had a Out of the Abyss. It's a 5e published thing. There's this great thing where you're trying to steal purple worm eggs, and it's all incredibly tense. And then, that purple worm, you're rolling the dice if you alerted them, and they've already met a purple worm and nearly been killed before it got away. They're terrified. You're rolling the dice. Flipping heck, they are rolling like demons. I am rolling on the do they alert the purple worm table. That I inevitably have made. And they, and it's constantly not being alerted. They go in there, and essentially the action is they go in, they take all the stuff, and they leave again with no combat. And but it was great. They were ecstatic. They felt ridiculously badass. We are this good. And you know what? They get into a fight every sesh, right? They're used to fighting things. It's rare that they do things so well that they get out without one.
How did you feel, Doc, in that? I mean, probably 10 minutes afterwards you felt, it was great session. But how did you feel at that point, though?
Oh, I was really impressed. I was genuinely, I was going, wow, you guys are going really well. And I did have in the back of my mind, what if they don't meet it? And I thought, I've got other stuff to do. I mean, I just go, wow, you guys are awesome. And then, we have a bit of it. If they look like they want to fight, they can have a fight. I can find something for them to fight. If they don't want to have a fight, then we just spend the rest of the session talking about how awesome they are.
Going back to what Neil was saying about that kind of, generally just going with it and relaxing. And I think that's where I would say I find that sometimes quite hard to do. And it's something I've actually sort of challenged myself with as a GM, really. And I've really tried to make the effort to be a say yes GM. Yeah, of course you can do that. Yes, of course there's something hanging around that you can use. And I think that has liberated me a little bit, because I think that does make you a bit more kind of receptive to what new ideas are. And I think when you've got like the big bad in the room, I think it's what Neil was saying. You're in your head maybe something that will happen, but your players, one of them might want to outfight it, but another player is probably thinking, oh no, I want to outwit the big bad.
Yeah. Or
somebody else going, no, I'm going to show the big bad that this is what we Earthmen call love. And just kind of not family shows do. But you know what I mean. They're going to have different approaches that they're going to think are going to work, and they're all going to get a terrific amount of fun out of that. And I think being a say yes GM.
Yeah.
I think we're not before the deep freeze. I'm not sure I was always like that. It opens you up to a bit of risk, and I think maybe where Steve, like GMs like you and I, are maybe a little bit more kind of fretful. Our risk reward calibration isn't always right. We want to take risks, let the players have loads of fun, and we kind of like that. But we've also got this kind of like, the more they go off the beaten track.
Are you looking for a D&D podcast with a dark side? Something more like Game of Thrones and less like Monty Python? Tale of the Manticore is part dark fantasy audio drama, part solo D&D RPG. There's no plot armor here. The dice make all the important decisions. Join me as I resurrect the excitement, wonder, and emotion of old school D&D. Made for a mature audience, Tale of the Manticore is both a fiction and a game. It's the story where chaos rolls.
So I've got a session which is completely open. I mean, I might have an idea. I'll always like to have a cliffhanger at the end if possible, like we all do. But I think it's where there's a story to tell. So again, coming back to the Warhammer situation. So there was something that was happening, and it was going to happen at that point. So this encounter with, this chaos, whatever it was. And it could have been quite easy to say, actually, we don't need to do that now. But I felt the pressure on me at that point. It was a great game. I loved it. It was brilliant. I mean, I think the players really enjoyed it as well. So it was not a bad session. I think what I'm saying is that it was just that I felt as though the way the players had played their characters meant that there was another option, which I closed down. I think that's always going to happen. And I think what I'm trying to get to in this is the best way to manage it. I think, we've said upfront, yes, having that agreement about actually we're all responsible for fun. And to be absolutely fair, with everybody I've played with since coming back to gaming, I've never had a situation where it's the GM's responsibility. Everyone's engaged, everyone wants to be there and part of the game. But I think it's more of a learning point for me, really, because I like to keep the pace up, and it's really hard. I tend to be very, front foot keep it moving. It's just about how the best way to manage that would be. So I think we've said stopping. Say, actually, I want to let's take a break now. I need to think about how we do this to make it as good as it can be.
The other way you can mitigate it is how I would mitigate it, and I know this is very much me, is that I'll plan as much as I can ahead. For last year, I ran at cons. I ran a Varson scenario, and I ended up running it 4 times. And every time, the climactic scene is obviously the same. The routes there varied, and every time the climactic scene played out slightly differently. I think by the time I got to playing it the final time, in my head, there was a whole I know, the options that the players have, that they are obviously unlimited by the player's imagination, but they are going to fall within these
certain parameters. Yeah.
And you can kind of say, right, that's it. I think I know what's going to, I've got 5 different options for what's going to happen. So I think you can plan up to a point. And I think some of the best stuff I've run in RuneQuest with my other group is where, when I know a combat's coming up, we've had the cliffhanger, and I've looked over everything, and I've said, right, this fella here, this adversary here, these are the first 5 things he's going to do if he's left to his own devices. This warrior here, she's going to do these 4 things if she's not interrupted. And that, I know it says a certain amount about me. I found that really helpful, because I felt
everyone wants to have a script to run through, isn't it?
In the end, of course, you depart from, as Mike Tyson says, everybody's got a plan until you get
the punch in the face.
And so I think that's Mike Tyson kind of paraphrasing Sanshu's Art of War. But, so the fact that those scripts got torn up within 2 rounds is irrelevant. I felt a lot happy at what I was about to try and orchestrate as a GM. You can't plan out of existence player agency.
You can take account of it, can't you? You can scenario plan, really.
Yes.
Yeah, scenario plan your scenario.
I would recommend that thoroughly as a way of, for me, for GMs like me.
As a not very accomplished GM, somebody who doesn't GM very often, that's actually one of the things that Dungeons and Dragons does well, is it does give you ideas for how the monsters behave in certain situations, and suggested tactics and stuff, which can be quite helpful. How does a troll react?
That's what I like about Forbidden Lands and also Alien, is that, so I think as a GM, you can go a bit soft. I can. Whereas in those, you just roll a dice and sorry that alien's just bitten your head off. It wasn't me. Yeah. So I was taking a leaf at Neil's book on that one.
Yeah. One of my favourite articles that really opened my mind was probably late 70s, early 80s. It was about Descent into the Depths of the Earth. And someone had written this sort of 2-page article about a Lich encounter in D2 and all the things that the Lich could do. It may have been also, there were a couple of vampires as well. And they had absolutely Martined this. They looked at the
Martin
list of
did.
spells.
We got a new
they got, they got a flow chart of all the things they'd gone. And I remember looking at that and said, oh my goodness, this is something you can do. And I absolutely remember my eyes going wham when I saw that. And like Martin, I love the lonely fun of trying to think of what people might do and coming up with answers for it and planning. And I totally recognize that and trying to anticipate the players. But on the flip side, there is the joy of playing the game to see what the dice and the game tell you happen. And I mean, and I'm not saying that Martin is a control freak, but he's not of a.
But he's our control freak.
No, he's enough of a control freak to create a beautiful playground and then let you play in it. He is not the sort of control freak that says, and now you're going down the slide, and now you're doing this, and now you're about to have fun. Now, so no, he does it well, but I think it's a lot of work. And just remembering the joy of the GM being surprised is great.
But that's my thing. I mean, one thing I don't like playing big dumb characters because I'm not particularly a kind of fighter type, kill it all type player. I'm kind of I like to be a sort of one of those players who sort of comes up with a clever plan. So.
We had noticed that in RuneQuest. Certainly, it's very much appreciated.
So I tend to sort of I'll tend to play the kind of more intelligent characters just because I find
what are you trying to say, Andrew? I can't play intelligent characters.
He can't bring himself down to our level.
No, exactly.
I know my limits.
No, I just think it's one of those things, to try and keep it in character. I don't like the idea of the sort of intelligence 8 barbarian coming up with this cunning plan. So
I think so. We touched on con games earlier, and I think again that's a very specific game type in as much as you're on a slide. Okay, there might be one slide where you might go off to one side, but you're going to end up at a certain point at the end, and you go into that con game knowing that's what's going to happen. So it's almost like the final session of a series, rather. So I'm thinking about our Judge Dredd game way back when, and was quite similar to a con game because you'd made all your decisions up to that point, and it's almost like you were playing out the consequences of the decisions you'd made. So it was really, that last bit was a bit of a railroad, but you've chosen that to get on that particular train.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've found this really helpful, actually, because I'm a little bit of I don't want to use words that are going to, manic is probably not the wrong word, but I think I'm quite a frantic. Okay, I'm a frantic GM. I'm a frantic, fretful.
You don't come across that way.
You don't. No, you don't.
You come across as calm and in control.
Yeah, that's how it feels inside.
Except possibly inspire.
Well, that was required.
Because when I was thinking about the idea of climactic scenes and lots of moving parts, in my mind, I was thinking of you, Steve, in that climactic scene for that spire.
Yeah.
I don't know how you did it because there were so many things flying off in all directions. So I think that was sitting as a player. That was a massive.
Yeah.
That was party chemistry, wasn't it? The sort of everybody came together with the same view, and everyone was there to help each other. And I think, as I say, my experience of gaming has been exclusively like that over the last 3 years or so. So I think for me, it's okay to take a break, and that's in terms of just thinking, let's take 5 minutes to make the best it can be. What do we think about retconning? So that situation where you think, oh, I can see head shaking. So you think that's just happened and it's gone really wrong. What do we think?
I don't know if I've ever done it. I mean, I think your players make decisions, don't they? Now I suppose there's like, if you as a GM have massively balls something up, maybe, but it's again, as long as the players don't know. I mean, why would you retcon that? I guess that's the thing that I don't understand. Like, if I've heard the people saying, the party's going to be wiped out. Let's just wind this back 5 minutes and say you go the other way instead. Well, what's the point in having choices and decisions and no consequences? Because what retconning is effectively saying is the consequences of your actions don't matter, because when we're not happy with them, we'll just wind back time and go down a happier path or whatever. So I'm not really a fan. I'm struggling to think of an occasion where it would be useful. I think there's nearly always going to be a better way of dealing with a situation where you might be tempted to retcon.
I think it's obligatory for me to just disagree with Neil, even though he is.
Well, this is shock jock podcasting. So.
It has to be, right? The times I have seen retconning, I play quite a lot of 3.5 Pathfinder sort of games, and I can think of at least 3 occasions where a character has been killed, and within 2 minutes they've come up with complex and entirely correct reasoning for why a particular rule was used wrongly, either in the round that they died or possibly even the round before. And Neil,
not on my table.
No, I do get that. But then again, you have beloved characters, and oh my goodness, do you know how long it takes to roll up a new one? Particularly if you're 9th level. And if they're, and I have seen this, I'm not a huge fan, I have to say, but I have seen it where it has been the lesser of two evils, where there is a clear rule-based reason why that character should not be dead, to go back and say, fine, we're not saying, you're out of the fight, we'll leave it there. So that's pretty much the only retconning I've seen. Retconning, apart from that, you have so much power as a GM. There is nearly always, exactly as Neil has said, a better alternative.
Yes, I totally agree. I think retconning is wrong, really. Well, essentially, it's saying to the players, look, you've got this game wrong. The game you're all playing, you've got it wrong. And I know the right way you should have played. That's awful. I would never, even if it's not said explicitly like that, which of course hopefully it never would be, but if that's the implication.
You're having fun wrong.
You are having the wrong type of fun. So, come on. I think that's, there's a, like Doc says, there are hundreds of ways you can do that without having to suddenly say, you've got it wrong, let's start again.
Yeah, and I'm also the thinking about that situation you're talking about there as well, Doc. I'm not 100% sure that is like if there's a like somebody you roll the wrong attack dice or something like that, and the character dies. Is it retconning to go? Oh, actually, I roll the wrong dice. I'm not sure that's retconning. That's just kind of fixing a mistake.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think that that's probably reasonable if but I think if you get past a certain amount of time and you kind of go, you got a new character and whatever, then you just move on.
Yeah. There's a statute of limitations over it, so a couple of rounds.
It's a 5-minute rule. If your character's been dead more than a round, they're dead. The only thing I was going to add in there is sometimes what's even worse than overt retconning is really crap Deus Ex Machina. I mean, I've said GMs have a lot of power, but sometimes, oh my goodness, could an angel not just descend and kill all the bad guys? I mean, that's I'd rather have died. Just do something else. Don't just say. Then clearly the GM is. I mean, this is a way of coping with the crunch time. You put the players into a position where they're not going to succeed, and clumsily rescuing them, I think can sometimes just be even more awful than saying, hey, I've made a bit of a mistake, I need to have a think.
I think we also have to maybe think about the fact that sometimes character death in a climactic scene, that's the payoff. That's what we're here for. I just had some thoughts really about kind of when you are preparing for that kind of end of a big scene. I think with con games, like Steve said, you are on a slide. As a GM, you've got loads of levers to pull con game. You've probably given out pre-gens. You've probably given them some motivations. You've foregrounded the skills you want them to use. So really, you've done a lot of the kind of, invisible railroading. So con games, you're going to get to that final scene, and there's going to be no necessarily crunch. There's going to be no big crunch time if it all goes according to plan, and people around the table are broadly in support of it. If you've got a game where it's like a season, at the end of the season there'll be a big scene, and it'll all finish. And again, like Steve was saying about the Judge Dredd game, the way there might have varied, but the big scene is pretty much where you want it to be. And then it'll finish, and there'll be seeds maybe leading on to a new season. So I think for that. When you've got a big old campaign, and this is certainly what I'm facing with Fall of Delta Green right now, I don't see how I can get a big climactic scene that will be an appropriate payoff for all the time got the lead up. So for me, I think the big payoff is likely to be downbeat. It's likely to be melancholic.
It's epilogue.
It's epilogue. And again, I think maybe as GMs, we need to think about that as well. Is that the payoff isn't necessarily bombs going off and corpses flying about. It's somebody walking off into the sunset like John Wayne in The Searchers. That's just as big a payoff.
I think you're absolutely right. It's that tension release, isn't it, really? And so the tension release, you can have that through combat or some sort of crisis that's been managed. But then equally, the characters could, as you say, there's that follow-up piece around what happens to them next.
There's also... I've seen it. Players decide that they can't take a character any further, or players have also planned for character deaths. They've basically, I've been in campaigns where a player has said to a GM, "I don't really want my character to survive this." Can we work out some sort of epic exit? And
that's satisfying in and of itself, isn't it? Because there's been sort of conclusion to a character arc, like we like to see in TV programs, don't we? It's like when a beloved character comes to an end in a TV series. That's got a lot of value to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, particularly if the other players don't know necessarily, that can be quite an epic point in the campaign as well. So.
Yeah. So that's been great therapy for me, guys, talking that stuff through. Like I said at the start, I think there's a continuum. You've got sort of the more fretful GMs, and I categorise myself as that on one side, or frantic, whatever you want to call it, and then you've got other people, and not not wrong, just different. I feel like Neil and Sam
Wrong.
and the others. Well, it's a continuum, isn't it? Like I say, your personality type, that's how you tend to GM as the people we are. That brings a lot of value, but I think also it's good to talk about this sort of stuff anyway, because I'm sure that other people out there listening will fall along that continuum, will have had experience the same sort of things that we have, because we're all gamers at the end of the day. But so, it is very much playing up front. Make sure you're playing with the right people, and you've got those expectations, about what happens when your characters, the characters die, how are you dealing with that, how are you going to deal with character death, how are you going to deal with if things don't go quite right. So sort of actually it's okay to take a break and sort of think a little bit more about that in game. Any sort of final thoughts from your perspective? Is it giving you different insights? Is it just me that was struggling with this stuff anyway?
I think it's just important to focus on why you're doing it, and you want people to enjoy themselves. There's very little more satisfying than when everybody's really engaged, whatever the scene is, you can tell. And I think it's easy to do that when you're sitting around a table. You can tell everyone's kind of focused.
Everyone leans in, don't they?
Yeah. And it's that kind of enjoyment, and that's really the kind of thing that you're after. You can't sustain it throughout a whole session, but you can. If you can get that at the right points in the game, I guess my advice is, think about why you're doing it. It is primarily about people enjoying themselves. I'd say, do enough prep around the crunch points, but don't over prep around the crunch points as well, because that's then you end up tying yourself down in terms of your expectations and stuff like that.
I'd agree with Neil. I think for me, it's just maybe spending 15 minutes thinking, right, I want the scene to go really well. What's the idea tree, if you like, of things that can happen? Maybe not even write anything down, but just think ahead what's going to happen. But by the same token, be prepared to rip it up when it doesn't go wrong. But I think if you start, I'm too fretful to start with nothing and just to think, I'll just see where this goes. That to me fills me with an uncomplicated terror.
I'd never do that. I prep a lot, which is maybe why I don't fret so much. But
So I'm currently running Coriolis more or less as a sandbox, and it's the first time I've really run a sandbox thing. Even back in the day, I didn't, and it's scaring the pants off me at times. But I'm doing it okay, I think. But I'm doing that kind of. So I think my advice would be, do plan, even if it's just in your head. Be prepared to rip it if it all goes wrong. But if you start with nothing, I would really panic at that.
And I think acknowledging that, if you say to players that perhaps you don't maybe not know that well, saying, I'm usually GMing this way. I'm doing something different here. We're gonna see how it goes. Really.
I've made that. Yes, I've made that very clear.
Bit of advice was actually given to me about public speaking, but it applies equally to GM, which is everybody watching or participating wants you to do well. No one is there. No one is actually there to kind of want, put you on the spot and want you to have a really bad time of it. Players aren't there to be hostile to you. They're not going to start throwing, or they shouldn't be anyway. Absolutely. So everybody is wishing you to succeed. So
I think that's where it comes from. Is we all want to have as good a time as we possibly can. And so I think it's about, as a GM, feeling that you're able to step up and do that, but in doing that in a
a counselling group time as well. So it's
I was just going to put a quick footnote in before you get twittered to death by all the young cool gamers who are going to point out that an awful lot of indie games, an awful lot of newer games, are set up so this just isn't a thing. In that, when Martin says, if starting with nothing would make me absolutely terrified, a lot of the newer games are set up to be a lot more collaborative. So, all this prep doesn't work. So I think it's important to say, yes, we are dealing with more trad, games where there is a scenario and the GM has an idea of where it's going, etc., etc. And based on that, I think it's been really useful. I think it is always lovely to hear that other people, that I'm sort of in the middle of the spectrum, really. with obsessive pernickety people like Martin at one end and madcap loonies like Neil at the other. I'm right in the middle, and that's cheered me right up.
As a footnote to your footnote, I've seen the demographics that people listen to this podcast, and there are no.
It doesn't matter.
It's all groovy people.
Yeah.
It's just old nerds like us.
It's not as much over 18 as over 40s.
Oh, well, the young. That's the young end. All right, guys. Okay.
Right,
well, thanks very much. And,
No worries.
hope you have
Really good fun.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to another exploration of my gaming vexes. If you've got any thoughts you'd like to add to what you've heard here, or a gaming vex of your own you'd like to offer up for discussion, you can contact me on Twitter @AllAnthar, or you can leave a voice message. The link's on the podcast webpage on Anchor, or can be found in the show notes. Until the next time, may all your games be free of vexatiousness, and be excellent to each other, always.